server. Well, Steph, welcome to the ODAT Chad podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so happy that you're here. We're going to be talking about sex and love addiction. Yay!
Yes.
Gosh, but I jest, but it can quickly turn into a very serious issue, right? I know a lot of people really struggle with sex and love addiction, and I would have to raise my hand to that. I come from the traditional addiction recovery world, and I know you have different terminology. We can call this sex, love, compulsion, but as we were discussing, it doesn't really matter what you call it, right? It's like this compulsion to overcome, the present moment where we don't feel good about ourselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there's some sort of haunting us that leads to compulsive behavior. So super excited to talk about that. But I thought maybe we would just start by getting to know you a little bit. Like maybe you could share with me like where you grew up and what your family of origin was like.
Yeah, of course. I grew up in Western Australia, but I also grew up in Greece. My father's Greek, my mother's Italian. They both migrated to Australia at separate times. Of course, they met many years later, and I was born in Western Australia. However, the first few years of my life was mainly spent in Greece. My father he really wanted to bring the family there. And my mum wanted to go there as well and just try and make it work. I'm the eldest of two brothers. And so we came back and when I was about 5. And so my first language was Greek, and come back, I had to go to pre-language and learn how to speak English properly. That was challenging as well, as I really miss my family, my cousins and my uncles, my extended family that I'm very, very close with, and still am very close with them. And just being in Australia I just felt awkward. I felt out of place. And so I think I made a lot of my life mean that I'm out of place a great deal. It's interesting, the experiences that we have and the interpretations and meanings that we layer over them really create much of the experiences and the relationships and the types of relationships that we have, and not only relationships to other people, but relationships to things and ideas in ourselves, right? Sex, love, intimacy, etc. So I really felt out of place. And addiction is really a way to get back into equilibrium. It's to get back into homeostasis to some degree. It's to feel not only good about ourselves, but feel calm, feel peaceful, feel safe. That's one of the functions of engaging in experiences that take us away from core wounding or intensified feelings. If feelings are so intense that we want to counteract them or counterbalance them. And so I spent a lot of my life compensating, feeling displaced, feeling isolated. I grew up in a volatile, violent family household as well. And that was very confusing. And it was largely confusing because there was also love in my household. And that was I couldn't get that as a kid. I couldn't understand that. And so that really distorted my view of intimacy in relationships and marriage and monogamy and so forth. Obviously I didn't have those words when I was a kid, but I was very withdrawn as a child, and again, that word isolated comes up a lot for me as a kid. Very out of place, didn't feel comfortable, didn't feel like I was seen, didn't feel like I was heard, didn't feel popular. I didn't feel like I was part of the in-group, had to really fight for it and struggle. And so I developed this persona of I've got to fight for everything I want, or I have to be someone I'm not to just get something that I want, which is love and affection and to be seen and just comfort and safety, right? And I have to hide much of myself. And I have to appease others and make sure everybody else is okay. And so I mention all of this because these are patterns that are very common to children, or very common to people, that we experience these and we develop coping strategies as young people, as children, and they usually carry over into our adult lives. And that was very true for me as well, without us really knowing about it. They reside in the unconscious aspects of self through patterning and behavior and the way we interact with the world. And so I just wore masks in my relationships. And, I discovered pornography I didn't discover pornography too early. Kids were having sex at my school when I was 10 years old.
Oh my
And
God.
I was shocked at that. And I try to be cool about it, but I was overweight. I was not cool. I didn't understand that. But 10 years old that was a big shock for me. And that really made me feel very uncomfortable. I didn't kiss a girl till I was 12. And that again, that was a big thing from where I was. And that was late. I didn't have sex until I was nearly 18. I had sex before I masturbated. So sex for me was,
Really?
it was very interesting.
Wait a minute. How does that happen?
I just didn't masturbate.
Did you?
And I
You
watched
did,
porn, and I was exposed to pornography, but I just never masturbated to it.
really? Okay,
Yeah.
that's really interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, not to divulge too much information. I don't know how much information you want me to divulge, but
Say it all.
so, I would be erect, but I wouldn't masturbate. So I was exposed to pornography probably at the age of maybe 13, 14. So again, not super
Not super young.
early.
Yeah.
And it was just by my friends and their older brothers.
Okay.
And they would put the pornography on, 70s porn and 80s porn, and it was.
Oh, so this is pre-internet.
Yeah, this was pre.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, I'm
don't
only
know
38, but I'm 38, but it was still pre-internet.
Okay.
I don't think we had some internet then, maybe at that age. Well, hold on, when did the internet come in? 90 or 99? No.
So I have no idea, but I remember the images. Remember the images used to download?
Yeah.
Be very hard to get like all excited over an
I
hour.
think we had internet, but it was mainly VHS, right? Videotape.
Right.
Anyway,
Yeah.
and magazine, and I just wouldn't. But once I started masturbating, and my first sexual encounter was with a prostitute as well.
How
friend
old?
took
At
me.
almost 18?
Almost 18.
Yeah.
And so once that started,
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I have to ask. I mean, you're a handsome guy, but you said you were overweight when you're all. Oh yes, I know.
I don't mean that in an arrogant way. Like I believe who I am. I'm a really,
yes,
really
I know.
good human being. You know?
Listen, it was so funny because I was introduced to you by Omar, and I listened to his interview with you. I was like a little embarrassed. I was like, Omar, calm down.
He's a great guy. I've got a crush on him too. I've got a crush on him as well.
He is pretty damn charming.
He is
for sure.
very.
But I just thought that was hilarious. But no, I mean, were you over? You were saying you were overweight when you were like 10. Like when did the fat?
I was overweight. Yeah. I started shifting that weight 15, 16. So it wasn't. Yeah.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying. Like coming into 17, 18, I was starting to mature. I was training. I was exercising. I was lifting weights. I was feeling good in my body. I was super fit, getting fitter. Like I had a disconnection between, and I can speak to my wounding. My wounding was I associated relationship and being in relationship with my freedom being taken away from me. I had a fear of commitment. I had a fear of losing my freedom because of what I witnessed in my parents and what I witnessed in my my friends' parents' relationships as well. Very dysfunctional, very disconnected, violent, abusive. And so whilst I wanted to be in an intimate relationship because it's something that I yearn for, to be seen, be connected to someone intimately, I had this fear that I hadn't dealt with from a child. And so prostitution and pornography and that game was easier than being intimate and being vulnerable with someone.
Right. There was that disconnect.
Yeah, but I was still pulled in intimate relationship. But then when I was in intimate relationship, I felt very uncomfortable and felt very disjointed in myself. And I started projecting that because I also had anger issues. As a kid, I was very passive. My father was very aggressive. I was very passive. But as a teenager, I started becoming fed up with that and I became hyper aggressive. And so in my teens and 20s, I was very angry, very aggressive. And I used anger as a secondary emotion to cover my sadness, to cover my fear.
Exactly.
You know, it's a male thing, hormonally and evolutionarily speaking, but it's also a cultural conditioning too. And so I went into that space and it was just easier being with prostitutes or easier having one night stands and easier doing this, no matter how attractive or not attractive I thought I was. But it was so much of it was driven by insecurity and wearing masks and false bravado and ego as well. And I almost couldn't break the cycle. I was addicted to it. Now, I wasn't so much addicted to the act. I was more addicted to the dopamine rush and more addicted to the alleviation, to the relief. I am free. I am committed. I don't have to be committed. I can do these things and I'm autonomous. And I was more addicted to the coping strategy that was dysfunctional and maladaptive and unhealthy.
Right. Yeah.
And that became a problem because I really destroyed many of my relationships and my relationship to myself.
Oh, that's the worst one.
That was tough because I was just in this cycle of guilt and shame and self-hatred and self-loathing, and then projection out in the outside world because I didn't want to take the responsibility consciously. So I would blame others and say, oh, it's their fault. Or it's, you know, if my businesses would be failing, I'd be up and down in businesses, burn and crash, or, you know, build and burn. And I would be blaming the market or blaming my business partners or blaming something else. Or just take responsibility. And I couldn't do that. And I was choosing not to do it. And I couldn't do it because I was choosing not to do it. And that was really challenging because I was still living in the past. That was, you know, unconsciously in my nervous system.
For sure. Do you feel like that, the blaming, would you consider that self-sabotage?
I see it is on the surface. Self-sabotage is an interesting thing. So I've worked with thousands of people, and this notion of self-sabotage comes up a lot. And superficially, on the surface, it looks like self-sabotage. And to some degree it is, but when you start digging, it's not that. Self-sabotage is really a mask for protectiveness.
Right.
Me trying to protect, or I'll use me as an example. It's me trying to protect myself from feeling feelings that my ego or my brain, my physiology, my amygdala, my nervous system, as two simple examples, is more than just that, feel it's too overwhelming to process and be with or be a witness to in the moment. And so I would engage in a coping strategy that can come off as self-sabotaging. So for example, I'm ruining these healthy relationships with infidelity. And one would say, oh, you're caught in this cycle of self-sabotage. You must not like yourself. Yes. And yes, that's true. Like I have an unconscious dislike for self and dislike for my actions, which we all do when we're in that place. And it's also me trying to protect myself from that deep fear, coming face to face with that deep fear of, one, losing my freedom, and two, being in a committed relationship, i.e. being seen. And the paradox is, I want to be seen because we all do. It's a basic human need, right. Yet I'm too scared of it. And right. So I'm caught in this internal tug of war.
Oh, it's brutal. It's brutal. Yeah. I mean, I see a lot of people with, you know, it's the same thing, right? It's this need for, you called it an unconscious dislike, but I had a very conscious dislike.
Me like too, actually. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So like we have, but you're right. It is, but it is it's both, right? Because in the subconscious, we are unaware. We are so, like, for me, I spent so much time disassociating that I didn't know what I was feeling, to be honest. And all that stuff was in my subconscious beliefs, but it was all born from this place of not good enough, right? Like those stories I learned to tell myself about who I was between 0 to 6, right? They say those are like the formative years. And then from then on, it's like confirmation bias. We look for the evidence to support the fact that we're small. And so like I had a very conscious dislike for myself. I would make a mistake and it was like, oh my God, you're such an idiot. You're such a piece of shit. Blah, blah,
very similar.
Right. And then like the infidelity, you know, I'm familiar. I say that now I'm in recovery. The only married man I sleep with now is my husband, which he appreciates. But yeah, this dislike that we have, and the pattern that you described, it's like we feel bad, so we go to our coping skills, right, which is the acting out, and then that gets the dopamine rush to distract us from the present moment of feeling. But then the cycle starts all over again, because then it's the guilt and the shame, and then it confirms our deepest fear, which is that we're not good enough or that we're bad in some way. So I'm so curious, how did you start to turn the ship, so to speak? Was there a pivotal moment in your life that you were like, this isn't working for me, I'm going to go get help? Or how did that come about?
For me, and I think it's true of where we are, where our global collective consciousness is, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on what perspective you take, we don't really learn through, oh, I probably shouldn't do that because it's not great for me.
Right.
I'll avoid that and I'll engage in healthier behavior. We often have to hit rock bottom. And I think it's evident too. I mean, you look at what's happening in the world today, right? Look at with COVID-19 and look at
Yeah.
have we really learned anything? I don't want to get into that discussion because that's not what this podcast is, unless you want to, of course. But
Not really.
no, and I don't really want to get into it either. I'm a bit tired of the conversation. But I use it as an example. You look at every war that we've had.
Yeah.
Like, we're still fucking not learning.
Right.
So, oh, well, I've got nuclear missiles. Great. We have the power to blow up a planet. You do realize that the planet that you're living on, your quote unquote enemy is living on, and you want to blow them up. You know that Chernobyl, in Japan, all of these examples where there's a nuclear fallout, it's actually going to damage you and your brethren and your family and your grandchildren, your generations. So people are fucking stupid. And so this is the collective consciousness that we're occupying, right? And so I was in that space where I was very ignorant to my actions because I was caught in the habitual loop of the pattern of dopamine high, dopamine crash, dopamine high, dopamine crash at a simplistic hormonal level, right?
Sure.
But I was also really scared. And so for me, I didn't make changes until I literally hit rock bottom. And I often say my face and my testicles were just scraped across rock bottom multiple times.
Sounds terrible.
Very terrible. Until I actually said, okay, I'm done. I really need to make some shifts, or I need to continue doing what I'm doing, but I'm probably not going to end up alive or in a very healthy place. And what the tangible catalyst for that was, the woman that I was with, my partner at the time, found out that I was unfaithful to a very, very deep degree. And that brought up a great deal of shame. It was the first time that I'd been, caught. It was the first time that transpired in my life. And it was just very overwhelming and very shock factor. That's what I'm getting at. I think the collective consciousness is we don't really learn until we have, boom, big shock factors. Mm-hmm. And it was then in that shock factor that I started to evaluate who I was being, what I was feeling, what I wasn't addressing, what I was ignoring, childhood wounds and pains that had come up. I'd suppressed a lot of my childhood, and we do that. The memory is good at doing that when we have traumatic experiences, yet it still resides in us at a cellular level in our unconscious being, and it still drives much of our behaviors without us knowing. So I sought help, I sought support, I went really deep. I'm an all or nothing person, have that personality.
Totally relates.
Most addicts do, or people that are compulsive do.
Yeah.
And so I went all in, like I really went all in, and, spent years, made many sacrifices along the way. And I don't say that to play a victim or for anyone to throw a pity party for me.
What do you mean you made sacrifices? I
lost friends. I lost part of my identity. I stopped my businesses. I nearly went bankrupt. I went into massive debt, did everything I could to get support, and you've got to pay for that support. In the world that we live in, and not all of it, but a lot of it, and professional support. And I really went deep. And I'm so grateful, so humbled that I had those people in my life to show me, to pull me through, to challenge me in bringing a better version of myself forward. Because I had that dream for myself. I knew what I was capable of. However, I wasn't acting in that way. And every time I acted against my vision for myself, so every time the version I was being of myself in any moment wasn't in alignment with my vision of myself, I was distancing myself from my truth. And that made me feel worse. And that made me dislike myself even more and hate myself even more.
Yeah. How did you learn to, dig up the past and forgive it and create this new vision for yourself? Was it through like traditional therapy, or what kinds of therapy did you try?
It was a combination of many things. I was very blessed that I was exposed to spirituality and diversification in spirituality from a very young age from my mother. And I also, I have formal education in behavioral science and social psychology. And
isn't that interesting?
Yeah. And then I was always interested in the mind and relationships and how people interact and how we can make life better. And so whilst I intellectually and formally studied all of these things, I wasn't embodied in them. I wasn't integrating them. I was being out of integrity. And so that was a foundation that I had. But I sought professional help, psychologists, psychotherapists, counselors, shamans, energy healers, energy workers, body workers, breath work, somatic work, psychosomatic, sexual somatic work. Like I went all in. Like I really went all in. Coaches, everything.
Everything. Yeah. Did you do the, I've been talking a lot about psychedelics lately. It just seems to be the ayahuasca.
I've done plant medicine. Yeah. I did a lot of that as well.
Yeah.
But I did that. I have a perspective on that. I have a stance on that. It's not super rigid. I'm happy to hear differently, but I didn't get into plant medicine until I processed a lot of my shadow in familiar states of consciousness. And I went to some very dark places, and I purposely went to dark places within my own psyche. I wouldn't want to do that on plant medicine. Now, I did do plant medicine, but again, after I processed a great deal, we forget that communities and individuals and shamans that were administering and taking and embracing plant medicine journeys, over the last few thousand years, weren't living in the societies and the complexity of the societies that we live in now. They weren't.
Oh, good point.
Yeah, they weren't dealing with extensive psychotrauma and childhood and trauma that we're dealing with now. They weren't dealing with disassociative partners and parents and communities. They weren't dealing, sure, communities had issues, but they were living in nature. They weren't dealing with EMFs. There was so much, the pollution and so forth. So we have to take all of that and more into consideration, because the organism responds to that. We're physiological, psychological, spiritual, and emotional beings. And so I was very mindful to process a lot of my stuff, or the density of it, in familiar states of consciousness. In other words, this is familiarity, right?
Sure. Yeah. No, you're right. I mean, I feel like doing your work prior to maybe doing something like that would siphon off a little bit that would be overwhelming. I've never tried it myself. I practice abstinence, but from what I understand, it's a very intense experience, but can also be really healing depending on.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
That sounds cool. So you reached this place, you went all in, and what was the transformation like for you? Were you able to was there like a process to forgiving yourself for, your past, or did you go all the way back to childhood to reframe maybe those experiences you had with your
all
parents?
of the above? Yeah, all of the above. I did generational work as well, and healing trauma through generational family constellation work.
What does that entail? I'm not.
It's having various people. So there's generally a facilitator or a couple of facilitators, a few facilitators, and then there's the students. I would be a student, and it's psychodrama. So you're playing different roles of what your core wounding is, and you're reprocessing those core woundings and feelings that were unfelt and expressions that were unexpressed at the time of infliction of wounding or trauma and so forth. And you're going into generational patterns of healing as well. So it's interesting, really interesting. But yeah, there's not much I didn't do. I haven't tried.
Yeah, that's very cool. Very experimental. So you're, well on your path, and you've decided to use your life to help others heal. When did that start?
Honestly, it started from a very young age, from when I was 18. So I've been 20 years in this space. Mm-hmm. However, again, I wasn't embodied, and so I wasn't living true to what I was saying. My words and actions weren't matching. And once I started processing all of this at a deeper level, I just wasn't dipping my toe in the shallows, or I was really, really processing. I was really choosing to go all in. That's when I was able to serve at a deeper level. That's about 6-7 years ago.
Okay, 6-7 years ago. And so I noticed, so you have a lot of different ways to help people. What are some of the programs, or maybe what are some of the programs that you have that you invite students to take?
Yeah, so it depends on what your needs are. We have my wife and I have an amazing program coming up. Virtual. It's a virtual inner child workshop, healing your inner child. Yeah,
that's where it's at.
It's where it's at. It's where it's at.
I feel like that. I want to hear more. I feel like the my life's work is about helping people raise their self-esteem, right? It's like Yeah, family of origin stuff is fascinating. Inner child stuff is amazing because I feel like that's where it all begins, right?
Mm.
And then it's, like you said, like some of us develop, unhealthy coping skills that bring us to
Mm.
rock bottom. But it's almost like, it's like we break wide open, and that's the good news, right? Because when things fall apart, it's often they can come back together in a
Yeah.
healthier way, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so what is your class about?
Yeah. So we start, I think it's 6th, 7th, 8th of June. So yeah, we're excited. It's Love Amplified, Healing Your Inner Child. It's a 3-day virtual workshop. Really it's about, and we spoke to this a little earlier, you and I,
Mhm.
grown-ups, we call ourselves grown-ups, but we're not really adults. Chronologically, we've aged,
I
right?
don't know what the
But
hell we are.
I don't know what we are either.
I
But,
don't know.
the truth is, unless we heal those wounds from our childhood, growing into our full potential as adults, it's very challenging, to say
Yeah.
the least. And the hurt that we experience as children, it stays with us as adults, and it dictates, it drives much of our addictions and our compulsions and our patterns of behavior that are in avoidance of feeling these core feelings. So we develop these coping strategies, and we develop these protective mechanisms, these self-sabotage strategies as well, to keep us acting out in that way. And we're just repeating the same hurt unless we heal it and resolve it. And so this inner child workshop is a way to get through all that. People that feel rejected, that have financial issues, that have anxiety, that in addictions, codependency, relying on others to make themselves feel safe or happy, eating disorders, weight and health issues, like cycling toxic and abusive relationships, different name, different face,
Right.
depression, lack of intimate connections, all of this, intimacy issues, difficulty trusting people. A lot of this not a lot of it, all of it, controlling your environment, trying to control everything in your life, people pleasing, not feeling enough, self-worth issues. These come from not dealing with our inner child stuff, the experiences that we had as children that were really painful. And so we work through all that. We provide very, very real life, real time strategies to help process and connect with the inner child, to identify the exact ways that inner child, or that aspect, that fragment of your psyche is screaming for attention. Understand the basic brain principles and neurology as well, to connect to those parts of our brain. Look at the different stress and anxiety pathways. Like there's one that's more grounded in physiology and reactivity, and there's the other that is more in the prefrontal cortex and is more anticipatory and so forth. And looking at the way these pathways intersect and interact with the wholeness of our psyche to make us feel very unsafe and very uncomfortable. So we'll go tools for mastering emotions, how to reparent your inner child. We'll do somatic in-body processes, breakout groups, guided journeys. Like it's, one-on-one coaching from us as well, for myself and Christine. We're both qualified coaches, and my wife has a master's degree in spiritual psychology as well. So we're just, that's essentially to sum up the program.
Okay, so it's like a 3-day. Is it a
3-day workshop? Yeah,
it's a 3-day workshop, and it's online or
online virtual workshop. Yeah, so this will
especially
be
in this time. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, 5th of June to 7th of June. Yeah, so 5th of June, which is a Friday, then all day Saturday, all day Sunday.
The 6th and 7th. Okay.
Yeah,
Very cool.
and
I'll
that's
definitely
Christine
leave a link.
Hassler. Yeah, christinehassler.com/inner child.
Very cool. I'm curious about maybe you could walk me through an example of reparenting your inner child. What does that look like?
Yeah, sure. So an example of reparenting in a child may look like this. So you're in the middle of a heated argument. Okay, so you're feeling really, really unsafe. And this argument with your partner is reminding you of how your parents used to argue. And in that moment, it's really helpful to notice what's happening in your body. Is your heart rate escalating? Are your palms becoming clammy? Are your thoughts racing? And then once you've noticed some stuff, just being mindful and present to what's happening physiologically in your body. Take some slow breathing. This helps calm the amygdala down. And have some different thoughts. That helps calm the prefrontal cortex down. So there's 2 pathways you're dealing with. And the thoughts could be literally this: I'm safe, I am not my parents. And if you're a male or a female, it's just, you talk to that little boy or girl inside, just close your eyes, you ask what age, 6 may come up. So with a little 6-year-old girl, what does she need right now? What does she need that she didn't get when she felt unsafe? And you get to provide that to that little part of you, that little girl within you, as an adult. And that's part of a reparenting process, as an example.
Oh, that's amazing. I love that. Those are great questions. What did she need that she didn't get? Yeah, that's pretty intense. And when people do this, what do people commonly come up with as answers for that question? What did you need?
It varies for everyone depending on their core wounding. It really does. Yeah. So like, for example, if, I'll give you some common examples are, I just wanted to be seen. I wanted to be hugged by my dad or by my mum. I didn't want to be yelled at. I wanted to feel safe. I wanted mum and dad to ask me questions. I wanted them to stick up for me. I wanted them to believe in me. I didn't want them to be critical of me. I wanted them to be around. Basic fears of abandonment, fears of loss, fears of rejection.
Oh, that's really interesting. Be around. I mean, I see a lot of women who, I work with a lot of women who have that abandonment, like they choose emotionally unavailable men.
Yes, I'm literally in the process of writing a book on that.
Are you really?
Tell you, every day I have women coming up to me and the subtleties. It's almost like it's a growing. I don't know. It's like a mold that's just growing and growing. The subtlety in unavailability is becoming less and less obvious because, before you think, oh, well, they're just not around, like they're working a lot or they're emotionally unavailable. But now it's shifting even more. It's not meeting each other's needs. It's long distance relationships. It's making excuses around intimacy or connection or to speak about values that aren't shared. It's about distance in connection and communication. There's just the subtleties in unavailability and the I don't want to say this, the repetition. It's just repeating old familiar patterns that are just because familiarity is safe. And if familiarity feels safe, we're going to always go to safe because that's what our brain, that's what our egos, our identity, our self-identity wants to go to, feeling safe.
Yeah, it seems like, I always come back to this idea that we have beliefs about who we are and what we deserve. And from those beliefs, we come up with the same questions. And if we come up with the same questions, then we come to the same conclusions, and then we make decisions, and then we take action. And then we just end up on this track of just going around the same issue. And I mean, I've done it myself where I'm like, how did I get here again? Because I look back and I go, I made the best decision I could with the information that I had, but I didn't realize I was asking the wrong questions. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so it's to me, it was like all subconscious. Like I didn't have better questions to ask. And so when, and I've done lots of therapy and I'm a voracious student myself. So it's always like this process of bringing in information, and it's been very helpful to help change. But when you guys are working with people, what do you feel like, how do people actually change? Is it just the new information or new experiences that help people change so that they can make different choices in the future? How do you see that playing out?
Well, firstly, it's everything you just said. Then I resonate with, and it's very accurate. I believe it begins with a willingness, though, and there's an inflection point within one's life where the pain of not changing outweighs the pain of the potential mystery or the unknown, or the potential pain of the unknown. And when we get to that point, and it's basically, in short, in layman's terms, enough's fucking enough. Like, that's what it is. It's like, Enough is enough.
Yes,
I'm done.
enough. I
That's it.
surrender.
Yeah.
There's
And then you have to
magic
have a
in
willingness.
surrender.
Yeah, there is. Yeah. And there's a willingness then that says, okay, I'm all in. Like I remember the exact moment that I said to myself, I'm all in. I'm either going to commit suicide because it gets too much. I'm going to end up in a mental asylum because it gets too much.
Yeah.
I'm going to break through these demons that I'm facing, this darkness that I'm going through, this pain that I'm experiencing, this stuff that I'm digging up. And I'm going to just live my best life and hopefully inspire others and maybe teach others along the way as well, at a deeper level, at a more profound level. And I kept the third in mind, but there were times where I went to both number one and number two.
Right. I mean, these compulsions or sex love addiction can take you to such a dark place, because I feel like it takes you to that place of, I am fundamentally broken and it'll never change. Right. That's a very dark place to be, because when you're there, what are your options?
Yeah. And the only way, well, there's not, the options are keep doing what you're doing. The only way to actually feel some level of wholeness, because that's what we're all pursuing. And again, homeostasis, the only way to feel that is through other people. So we seek the validation outside of ourselves. You know, whether it's being with, for me, it was being with as many women as I could be, but with attractive women, or with just whatever it was, whatever it was, being validated, it was being appreciated by strangers that emotionally meant nothing to me, yet it was spiking that feeling of, I feel good about myself and I'm deriving this from someone else. And that would wear off. And then guess what? I'd need more of that. So where would I go to? Well, I have a familiarity. That's a safe place. I'll just keep going there.
Yeah.
Because I don't have to be exposed. It feels like I'm being intimate, but I'm not. It's a confusion. It's a fallacy.
Yeah.
Just keep going back to that because it feels so good superficially.
Yeah. It's a moment of relief from that dark
and then
place.
those moments, it's like gateway drugs, you know, those moments needed more and more.
Yeah.
Faster and faster, deeper and deeper.
So this work that you've been doing, it sounds like, you know, when you address that stuff, you finally give it the attention that it needs and it starts to resolve. What are some of the ways that you help people instill positive beliefs about themselves? Is it through things like affirmation, or is it simply by letting go of those negative experiences, whether it's physiological or whatever? Is it just by letting go that the good comes in, or do you actively feel like you have to replace it with like a sufficient substitute?
Depends on the individual. Usually people that carry addictions, it's very difficult to just, so say take someone that's smoking and they smoke a packet a day and you just say to them, okay, stop smoking. Just no more cigarettes, just cold turkey, just stop. It's very difficult because the psyche feels like it's losing because it's literally lost a pattern, a habit, a practice, a crux, a go-to, a feel-good. So often it's good to replace one behavior with another healthier behavior, or introduce a healthier behavior that slowly replaces a negative or unhealthy, unsustainable pattern of behavior, whatever that may be. But it really varies for everyone. Everyone's different. And so I use many different tools. I'm qualified in different areas in different ways. However, one thing I will say is what's fundamental and supportive to all of that is really just seeing, acknowledging, appreciating, and respecting people, and holding a space and a safe environment for them to just be themselves without judgment. That's really the foundation for a lot of what I do, is just witnessing people. Of course, I don't just sit across from them, or whether it's Zoom or in person, just look at them. I'm not talking about that, although sometimes we do that where there's just silence, and stillness and silence is great power in that.
Right.
But it really does begin with creating a safe place and just seeing people in a non-judgmental way. And I think what I've learned in my life, I was very judgmental, and I got a lot of that from my environment, and I didn't change it until not that long ago, really. And I mean, it's human to be judgmental. The brain discerns and compartmentalizes, and that's a form of judgment. But I'm talking about just harsh judgment. If someone disagreed with me, if someone wasn't in line with my values, if someone said something I didn't like, I'd attack them personally. I'd emotionally abuse them. Like I was just really very threatened all the time. My amygdala was very hyperactive, and it still is sometimes. Like I just, that's PTSD. That's trauma. Like you got to work through that, and every moment's an opportunity to work through that. But I was very, very judgmental, and I was just so judgmental upon myself. And I really feel that people that experience things like that, like being very judgmental, having been that myself, when people present to me with something, they're so shameful, have so much shame with what they've done and who they've been. Mm-hmm. I look at them most of the time, I just say, oh, I don't want to tell you what I've done. I don't want to tell you who I've been. And that actually diffuses, I think you usually say that. And that diffuses, it makes them feel, oh, okay, so I'm normal. Yeah. I'm not alone, I'm not alone. Because that people feel alone. It's horrible. I'm sure you felt it. It's
for sure. Yeah, it's that feeling of I'm alone and I'll never be different, or just bad, just feeling bad.
Yeah.
Like I'm a bad person.
Yeah.
But it's like, it sounds like you hold a space of empathy. And I was just listening to a talk by Brene Brown, and she was like, empathy is the antidote to shame. Yeah. And that made so much sense to me. And, first we need to receive love and compassion and empathy from someone else. As just you demonstrating that empathy, it allows me to give it to myself.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So, I mean, if you can do it for me, then I can do it for me. But it's almost like you need like a little infusion first before you can start on the way of maybe I'm not so bad, or maybe this is just part of my human nature, or maybe this was me acting out of a place from brokenness or hurt, and that doesn't deserve condemnation. It deserves empathy. Yeah, it's a whole different way of looking at it, right?
Very much so. I had one of my counselors during that time that I mentioned, that was the catalyst for my transformation. I divulged everything to her. I went deep with her in terms of truth telling, more so than I ever have done before. And she was she's still alive, is a very wise woman, very educated, very wise. The greatest thing that she did for me was meet me with non-judgment and empathy. Beautiful woman, beautiful human being. She was able to diffuse my shame and really crack my heart open and de-armor me in a way that it just didn't happen before. And of course it was because I made the choice to be really honest as well and be very vulnerable and open. And she just provided a very safe place to do that. And that's the power of the feminine too. It's a really beautiful gift.
Yeah, it sounds like you were really ready too. It was like a combination of things all coming together to a focal point where you were like really ready.
Yeah.
And you drew her in.
I was ready. I was ready.
Yeah, you got to be ready. Just never happens until you are, I suppose. Yeah. So, here you are, you're 38 years old. You have built this beautiful life with your wife, and you and your wife have dedicated your lives to helping others. And, I would imagine your self-esteem is at an all-time high. Looking back at that 18-year-old boy, what would you say to him now, knowing what you know now?
Just believe in so many things, honestly, but just believe in yourself. Believe in yourself at a deeper level. But I did at that time. I took risks. I traveled the world. I got a one-way ticket to Europe. I just put myself on. I printed out my resume, and I was working on cruise ships. And I didn't have any of that planned. I just went. I did a lot of things as a young man, but it was still masked. That was I couldn't see myself. I couldn't see my worth. I really couldn't. Mm-hmm. So I would say that, just believe in yourself and see your worth. Really see your worth and your value and the gifts that you have.
Right. Yeah, no, that's beautiful. It's tough to receive until you're able to let go of the shame.
It's been one of my toughest lessons, is receiving. Still is sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you do today? So two questions. What do you do to continue nurturing your evolution, right? Like we're always evolving, right? So what do you do to further your evolution, and what do you do for fun? I mean, we talk a lot about doing this deep work, and so often in recovery, people are like, oh my God, I'm not going to be able to do drugs or drink anymore. What am I going to do for fun? There's like it's a real fear for some people.
I do a lot of things for fun. So I exercise and train. I love that.
I saw your hands. You must be doing some
Oh,
kind of,
so bad.
what are you doing?
It's horrible at the moment. Yesterday, it's self-inflicted. It's silly because I need to, my hand care is appalling. I need to look after my hands, and this wouldn't happen. And I'm going tomorrow to get sandpaper from the hardware store and look after my hands and make sure I use my hands a lot. I
Sandpaper
train
for
a
your
lot.
hands?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
What do you do?
Well, there's a process, there's a procedure. So hands in hot water,
Okay.
really soften the hands, and then literally just sandpaper the calluses and smooth them down, and do
Oh.
that, 2-3 times a week.
So if you don't have calluses, then when you're working on bar stuff, they don't tear. Is that the idea?
Yeah.
Noted. I do not do that. Nails. Okay. That's good.
But
Okay.
for
So
fun. Yeah. Look,
I was like, I hope that's not your fun.
no. My hands are in agony at the moment. They're in a lot of pain.
Oh, they look terrible.
It's very raw skin.
Look very bad.
So I enjoy watching movies. I mean,
Nice.
it's so nostalgic for me, right? It really is. Hollywood, it's just
Old
nostalgic for
movies?
me.
You like old movies?
Depends how old. I like 80s movies, the 80s and 90s movies.
Oh my God, you would get along great with my husband if it's
Yeah,
if it's
love
if it's in the 1900s. They love it. Terminator, all these old movies. I'm like,
love that. Yeah, I love
really?
the action movies. Yeah, I grew up on those guys, but I travel a fair amount. I love
Nice.
exploring. I love being in the outdoors, whether it's mountaineering. So I'm a mountaineer.
What's that?
Just climbing in the mountains.
Just like, is it like hiking, or are you doing
It's
like,
a
are
little
you
more than hiking. It's a bit more technical. Yeah, mountaineering
okay?
is more technical. Yeah,
Okay.
but I enjoy hiking. So we travel a lot. Obviously now at the moment with COVID, we're not traveling much, but we travel a fair amount. So traveling is something that I do for fun. I
Is it
teach.
just the two of you that go traveling?
Yeah. We don't have
Do you with
have
friends
children.
or
Oh
no
yeah, so
kids?
we go with friends as well. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where do you
Yeah.
like to go?
Oh, where don't I like to go? Anywhere and everywhere.
You
I
guys are all
mean,
over
New
the place.
Zealand is one of my favorite places.
It's beautiful.
Hawaii is beautiful. I love Europe as well. South America is very appealing to me as well. I haven't been to Canada yet, actually. I've been to many countries, but I haven't been to Canada. So Canada is somewhere I'd like to go.
I hear Montreal's a beautiful city.
Yeah. Quebec is. I've heard great things about that. I like to try new things, new hobbies. Archery. So I'm really into archery at the moment. Do that for fun, and
Very cool.
getting out in the wilderness and plant medicine is fun. Not that I take a lot of it. I really don't. But when it calls me, then I love that. And teaching. Like you asked me how I learn and how I grow. Like, I do that through teaching, but I'm a perpetual student as well. Like I'm always reading.
Sure.
I'm always learning. I'm doing courses. I'm learning from other masters and other coaches and teachers. I have my own private coaches and people that I work with, even when I feel really good in my being, because that's important. It's important to have
huge.
that support.
Yeah. As you're pouring into others, it's like you also need to, boundaries are really important about that. But
I like playing chess. I like building things, learning to build things. Yeah.
Very cool. It's good to have lots of hobbies.
Mm.
So, sorry, I drew a blank for a second. So, okay, so you have lots of programs and you have this one coming up early in June. So I'll definitely leave links for that. And you mentioned that you're writing a book. Do you have a working title for your book yet?
No, not yet.
Not yet. Well,
Not yet.
You'll have to come back when your book is done and we'll talk about your book.
Absolutely. That'd be wonderful.
Awesome. Well, it was such a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for your time.
Likewise. Thank you. And I really appreciate you as well.
Yes, I'll leave links to all your stuff so people can find you. What's the best way for people to connect with you?
Either on social media, Stefanos Sifandos, at Stefanos Sifandos, any social media channel, or I've got a couple of websites, but one of my websites is Grow with Steph, GROW with Steph, STEF.com. And you can find a heap of resources there as well, and my programs and ways to work with me and just information on what I do as well.
Well, that's awesome. Well, I really appreciate the work that you're doing. It's so needed in this world. And I love what you and your wife do together as well. I listen to her podcast. She's got an amazing podcast, Christine Hassler's podcast. So love the work you're doing. Thank you so much for your time, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, that's a wrap.
Great.
All right.